For 40 years, neuroscience has relied on a specific picture of the brain's immune system. The standard model treats the microglial cell as quiescent, a resting entity that encounters a signal, like an amyloid plaque, and flips a switch to become active. Every element of that picture is false. These cells are not born in the brain. Microglia are tissue macrophages descended directly from the embryonic yolk sac. Because of that lineage, their capacity for phagocytosis, complement opsonization, and cytokine release is a constitutive property. They possess this heavy machinery from the beginning. They are dangerous by constitution. A healthy brain does not withhold this destructive machinery. It actively forbids its use. The cell is held continuously in a state of molecular restraint. Maintaining this suppression requires a massive, continuous expenditure of metabolic energy. The brain pays a high cost to keep these cells on a leash. Decades of antagonist research have focused on the accelerator, but Alzheimer's follows the collapse of the braking system. A restrained microglial cell exhibits a specific homeostatic signature, identifiable by a precise set of transcriptional markers, like P2YRY12 and TMEM119. This signature is a biological subscription paid for by the surrounding tissue. The healthy parenchyma continuously issues a standing order, primarily through TGF-beta and SMAD signaling pathways, instructing the cell to maintain its specialized identity. If you remove a microglion from the brain or silence that TGF-beta signaling, the subscription is canceled. Within hours, the cell loses its homeostatic markers and reverts to a generalized macrophage. A release paradigm requires a different pharmacology. Intervention must focus on re-engaging the lost instructions that kept the cell in check. Immune restraint is dependent on tissue health. When neurons are sick, they issue a weaker order, yielding a less braked microglion that damages more neurons. There are 5 distinct classes of microglial restraint. The class that fails early enough to matter therapeutically is Class 2, the diffuse neuromodulatory brakes. 2 neuronal populations are responsible for this restraint. The locus ceruleus dictates global tone, releasing norepinephrine that acts on microglial beta-2 adrenergic receptors. On the right, the somatostatin interneuron provides localized control to its own cortical laminae via SST receptors. Both networks act as continuous governors. Neither uses tight synapses to speak to the immune system. Instead, they operate through volume transmission. The cells broadcast their signaling molecules into the extracellular space, bathing the resident microglia in a continuous suppressive tone. Most neurons in the cortex are physically shielded from these immune cells by a Class 4 physical brake called the perineuronal net, a condensed extracellular matrix that restricts microglial access to the neuronal surface. There is a stark exception to this protection. Neither the locus ceruleus neuron nor the somatostatin interneuron possesses a perineuronal net. The 2 cell populations responsible for keeping the microglion on a leash are physically the most exposed to its bite. The prevailing literature dates the failure of the locus ceruleus 30 years before the somatostatin network. This discrepancy is the result of conflating 3 entirely different biological events into a single measurement of failure. We have to isolate the events. Event 1 is the initial lesion, the first moment the operating neuron shows signs of pathology. Looking at pathology across the Braak stages, pre-tangle tau appears in the locus ceruleus in the 3rd decade of life. Meanwhile, the somatostatin cell never accumulates tangles at all. Event 3 is the death of the operator cell, the moment classic neuropathology measures. When we plot Event 3, the timeline fractures. Somatostatin cell death occurs in the preclinical window, while somatic loss in the locus ceruleus does not begin until Braak stage 3. Dating failure by the first lesion or cell death provides an incomplete timeline. Neither metric measures the moment the brake actually stops functioning. The only event that matters to the immune system is Event 2, the functional failure of the brake. Functional failure happens in 2 ways. The neuron can stop supplying the ligand, or the microglion can stop reading it by withdrawing its own receptors. Long before the locus ceruleus dies, target microglia actively withdraw their beta-2 receptors around the earliest amyloid plaques. Prior to their death, surviving locus ceruleus neurons derange. They fire hyperexcitably, flooding the target field with norepinephrine and desensitizing whatever receptors remain. The somatostatin interneuron's output collapses in a similar sequence. Its peptide production plummets well before the cell is actually lost. When we plot event 2 for both networks, the receptor side failure of the locus coeruleus and the ligand side failure of the somatostatin network converge in the exact same 15-year window. Alzheimer's pathology involves a near-simultaneous double release of microglial restraint in the preclinical phase. The loss of the somatostatin brake produces a specific deficit. Under healthy conditions, this peptide suppresses microglial inflammation through the NF-kappa B pathway. The somatostatin brake has an unusual secondary function. While it suppresses inflammation, it is the only brake in the inventory that actively releases the cell's clearance arm. It issues this clearance license by lowering the expression of inhibitory siglacs like CD33, allowing the microglion to consume amyloid. When the somatostatin brake is withdrawn, the dials snap to opposite extremes. Inflammation spikes, and clearance drops to zero as the CD33 inhibitors reassert control. Because these two systems fail together, human tissue only ever arrives at the microscope decades past both failures. We have never examined a human Alzheimer's brain experiencing a single break state. The core paradox of the diseased microglion, a cell that is fiercely inflamed yet incapable of clearing amyloid, is the predictable outcome of losing these two molecular hands simultaneously. Supplying more norepinephrine to the brain does not alter the course of the disease. The locus coeruleus brake fails asymmetrically on the receptor side. The norepinephrine ligand is present, but the receptor is gone from the microglial wall. The somatostatin brake exhibits the opposite asymmetry. The peptide output has collapsed, leaving intact SST receptors completely empty. You cannot agonize a beta-2 receptor the cell has already deleted, and you cannot rely on an endogenous somatostatin ligand that the interneuron has stopped producing. This points toward a dual agonist intervention, combining a beta-2 adrenergic agonist to force receptor re-engagement with an SST4 agonist to replace the depleted peptide. Disease modification depends on pharmacologically re-engaging the two molecular hands the brain lost during the preclinical window.